Yeah, Anderson, actually, it's a pretty big clue into his state of mind right now. It's really all that investigators have to go on. In the posting, which we're told by sources, the posting was posted sort of moments before the attack, short time before the attack, but it's clear that it took some time to write. It's pretty lengthy, and he goes on a sort of tirade about how Muslims are being attacked by Americans, and that if the U.S. wanted lone wolf attacks to stop, they would sort of stop killing Muslims, is what he's saying. And it just goes on to this whole, his issues with the United States and their treatment of Muslims.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Day 20 of the Trump transition has been high on drama and intrigue. We'll get to all of that shortly. But from internal feuding over whether Mitt Romney should be tapped to be Secretary of State to allegations of voter fraud, absent any evidence at all coming from the president-elect himself, to the recount effort being steered by Green Party candidate Jill Stein. She joins us tonight. But first, the breaking news from Ohio. Tonight, investigators are working to determine if an attack on the campus of Ohio State University was, in fact, terrorism. A source telling CNN the attacker posted grievances about attacks on Muslims on Facebook. This morning, students just returning from Thanksgiving break came face to face with the unthinkable. A car drove into a crowd. A man with a knife jumped out. He hurt 11 people before he himself was shot dead. Now, as we do on 360 in situations like this one, we'll try not to overuse the attacker's name so as not to give him the attention he might crave. But what we do think is important that you're aware of, and what else we're learning, is authorities continue to look for clues. Bryn Gringras has the latest.
Tonight, university police naming the suspected attacker as OSU student Abdul Razak Ali Artan. A federal law enforcement official tells CNN he was a Somali citizen who lived in the area. A U.S. official says he was a legal permanent resident. Investigators are still working on determining motive and can't rule out terror at this point.
We have to consider that it is that possibility. We had an attack earlier this year with a man with a knife causing multiple injuries. So we're always aware that that's the potential, and we're going to continue to look at that. That's why our federal partners are here and helping.
Police say the attacker deliberately jumped the curb with a car and rammed into a group of pedestrians. A federal official tells CNN the car used in the attack was registered to a family member.
Around 9:52 a.m., the emergency dispatch center got a report that a vehicle had struck pedestrians.
He then continued to attack, slashing people with a knife.
He exited the vehicle and used a butcher knife to start cutting pedestrians.
Less than a minute later, the attacker was confronted by a police officer.
He engaged the suspect and he eliminated the threat. The suspect is DOA.
Within minutes of the attack, a campus-wide alert went out reporting an active shooter on campus: run, hide, fight. A federal law enforcement official tells CNN the gunshots reported may have been of the police officer shooting the attacker. On campus, students and faculty blocked doorways and hid while waiting for the all clear.
Our teacher ran in and locked the door, and at the same time we all saw we heard a bunch of sirens and a bunch of cop cars all just started flooding towards that area.
It's scary. It was really scary. We barricaded ourselves in our rooms like we were taught, turned off our lights, and just hunkered down.
Bryn, it seems like the police officer who finally shot this attacker got there really quick. What more do we know about him?
Well, we know, Anderson, that his name is Alan Haruchko. He's 28 years old, hasn't even been a part of the OSU police force for 2 years, so very, very new to this department. We also know at one point he was an OSU student himself, and yeah, law enforcement says he was in the right place at the right time, but at the same time, he did act quickly, killing the suspect in less than 1 minute after those attacks started. So certainly a lot of credit is owed to him because 10 people were injured, all non-life-threatening injuries, Anderson.
Yeah, Bryn Gingras, thanks very much. Bryn, CNN producer Shimon Prokupecz has been working the story as well. He joins us now. What more do you know about the attacker's social media postings? Because that's obviously something investigators are looking closely at.
Yeah, Anderson, actually, it's a pretty big clue into his state of mind right now. It's really all that investigators have to go on. In the posting, which we're told by sources, the posting was posted sort of moments before the attack, short time before the attack, but it's clear that it took some time to write. It's pretty lengthy, and he goes on a sort of tirade about how Muslims are being attacked by Americans, and that if the U.S. wanted lone wolf attacks to stop, they would sort of stop killing Muslims, is what he's saying. And it just goes on to this whole, his issues with the United States and their treatment of Muslims. And he doesn't really specify exactly why he's doing this. He does mention, and again, we've seen this in other attacks, Anwar al-Awlaki, this cleric who the U.S. had killed years ago in a drone attack, whose name still surfaces in some of these attacks. Folks look to him for inspiration.
Sometimes the more investigators look at these people, they use sort of terrorism as a cloak, but also they have other problems going on. Are there any other signs about what was going on in this person's life?
Yeah, there are some other clues. The family, specifically the mother, has told community members, has told law enforcement that he was having some problems at school. She says the problems were with grades, but there was a story from the college, from the university newspaper that says that he was complaining that not having enough space to pray. He didn't have the right places. He couldn't pray as openly as he wanted to. And the newspaper had published that story again today, sort of reminding folks, just saying, hey, back in August, he had complained to us about some of the issues at the school and not being able to pray.
What's the next step for investigators tonight?
So they're sort of talking to family. That's what they're doing tonight. They're talking to family, or talking to their friends. The police have said that they're waiting for search warrants at the home. Also, we're told that some devices were recovered from his vehicle, so they're waiting to get search warrants for that. So they really, I think, right now want to see if he was consuming any other propaganda. Was he consuming ISIS propaganda? Was he viewing these al-Awlaki videos for inspiration for this attack? So those are really the steps. And also the big thing is to make sure he wasn't working with anyone else. And also, was he communicating with anyone overseas? There are no signs of that right now. They're also authorities are telling us that he was not on anyone's radar. So
right.
This guy just, for whatever reason, decided today and to do this attack.
All right, Shimon Prokupecz, thanks very much. A lot to discuss. Joining me now, CNN counterterrorism analyst Phil Mudd. He's served as a senior official in both the CIA and the FBI. Also, CNN national security analyst Peter Bergen, whose books about terrorism include The United States of Jihad. Phil, I imagine viewers listening to this hear people saying, well, we're not sure if it's terrorism yet. You put the pieces together. Obviously, he's talking about grievances against Muslims. At the very least, he wants to be identified as his act is the act of a terrorist.
He may want to, but the speed with which the American people want answers is not the same as the speed, the velocity of the investigation. Look, we have to understand his job history. We have to understand girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, family history, who he might have been communicating with online, what his Google search history is. So we have a couple of clues here that might suggest mindset. We don't have answers from things like interviews and online searches that give us a final resolution. The problem in this case, Anderson, is over the course of the night, people are going to say, I've reached my conclusion. Why can't the feds reach theirs? That might take a couple weeks, a month, especially in a case where you have a singleton, where you can't look at his communications with the co-conspirator that might offer other clues.
Peter, the United States of Jihad, your last book, you wrote, you basically analyzed every jihadist or would-be jihadist in the United States. Where does this guy fit into it, and what jumps out at you?
Well, I thought it was interesting that the Facebook postings were all so recent, according to Shimon. That reminds me of the Orlando attack, where he posted on Facebook his pledge to ISIS sort of as the attack went down. It reminds me of the San Bernardino attack, where the couple also posted their allegiance to ISIS as the attack went down. So that's one interesting thing that leapt out of me, Anderson. The other thing is, he doesn't really fit the profile of a lot of the people I looked at. He's a lot younger than the average jihadist terrorist we've seen in this country. He's actually very, very much younger, aged 18. So that's sort of unusual. As Phil says, we'll know more. In about a third of these cases, Anderson, of these lone wolf attacks, we see some kind of history of mental instability. Now, we have no evidence of that yet, but that's something certainly investigators would be looking at.
Phil, you hear Shimon saying, well, his mom said he had trouble at school. Plenty of people have trouble at school. Right. And, things like driving a car into a crowd, that's something that ISIS and other groups have encouraged people to do. What does it tell you? Is this a sign of ISIS strength or weakness, or, assuming he's in some way trying to follow some sort of direction of jihadists?
I look at this and say, I'm talking to my family, for example. Is this an indicator, as you're saying, that ISIS is on the rise? 2.5 years ago, we saw this sort of fireball of ISIS moving across the sky, gobbling up territory in Iraq, talking to Americans, to British, to Europeans to come join the caliphate.
And we saw people trying to leave.
That's right. And now you have the FBI and more recently European security services saying they're seeing fewer kids go over. ISIS itself has said, please don't come here. More leaders are being killed in the battlefield, and obviously they've lost a lot of geography. You should look at this as one of the embers of a dying organization, not as an indicator that that organization, that is ISIS, is still burning as bright as it did 2 years ago.
But I mean, a dying ember can still burn a lot of people. I mean, if somebody is just using whatever weapons they have at hand, a vehicle, a butcher's knife, short of getting that person on the radar beforehand, that's a tough thing to try to stop.
That's right, Anderson, but let me bookend something for you. We have a relatively unsophisticated attack here, a small vehicle with a knife. Go back 2 days, the biggest football game of the season, right. Ohio State and Michigan, is held over the weekend. Huge group of people.
Right.
I wouldn't offer a clue to terrorists. They've already done this. If you really want to think through this as a trained ISIS operative, clearly he wasn't. Rent a truck, get a weapon, right. Videotape for social media, and drive through that kind of crowd. We didn't see any of that here.
And that's certainly something, obviously, we saw in in Cannes over the summer. A guy in a truck just driving through a crowd.
Yeah, and he killed 86 people. So
excuse me, Nice. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and as we've seen with school shootings, Anderson, I think that there's often a copycat quality to some of these attacks. School shooters tend to study previous school shootings. Terrorists often do the same. Obviously, this guy, luckily, didn't achieve the effect that he was hoping for.
Yeah. Peter Bergen, Phil Munn, appreciate both of you being with us. Coming up, President-elect Donald Trump falsely says he won the popular vote, when the truth is he's actually losing Hillary Clinton by more than 2 million votes and counting. Not that that matters, because he is won. He claims, and this is not true, that the reason she got more votes is because millions of people voted illegally. And that's not the only falsehood he's been spreading on Twitter. We'll take a look at that next. We'll also hear from the Green Party's Jill Stein, who is initiating recounts in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. She's getting a lot of donations, millions of dollars to do it. What she told me about what's behind the effort and some other things. We'll ask her some tough questions when 360 continues.